Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. And I have a few questions for you all today, and that is, how many times do you check your smartphone during the day? And when checking your smartphone, how often are you checking an SMS message from a company that's bombarding you with irrelevant communication about anything from banking, insurance, or pizza delivery? And then also, what about robocalls, where machines just keep ringing your number and you don't answer it and wait to see if it leaves a voicemail or not? And if they leave a voicemail, you might check it. If they don't, you add it. You might Google the number and then add it to a block list. Or applications that mess up our home screens with too many notifications, leaving an annoying number next to your app. And you have to go in the app that you never use to clear the notifications down again. These are just a few examples of nuisances on our smartphones. And according to an FOI request from Quadient, the ICC received over 131,000 complaints about nuisance calls and texts in 2021, compared to only 103,000 the year before. And this problem is just getting bigger and bigger. And the usual suspects are banking and energy saving and everything in between. So with all this in mind, I've invited Andrew Stevens from Quadient to come on the podcast and explore this topic with me today. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Sheffield, where Andrew will take a deep dive into this topic with me today and much more. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Andrew Stevens. I've got the best job in Quadient as far as I'm concerned. I'm one of our customer experience principals. I spend my days looking at various industries in the world of customer experience and chatting to our customers. And then I translate their pains into ways that we can develop our solutions to help them, really. My background's in banking, in financial services, in insurance, those sorts of areas. So I tend to focus there. But I love looking across every industry and trying to grab best practice from different places. But there is more to it than that. I'm aware I've just described my job as I chat to people about stuff. But that's ultimately what I do. And then we try and take that information and build great solutions out of it.
And I spoke with Scott Drager last year, and he also thought he had the best job there. So you guys need to have a chat. But for anyone that missed that conversation, can you just have a bit of an overview of the kind of problems you're solving with technology?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's no surprise that Scott was the person that brought me into Quadient, actually, a few years ago. He's a great guy. But yeah, we're Quadient. We're the leader in business solutions for creating and managing really, really personalized and meaningful connections between the businesses that we serve and their customers. So we do that through digital and physical channels. So on the hardware side, we make sure that businesses can get their mail out as smoothly as possible. And then we cover that final mile as well by having parcel lockers all over the world. So customers can actually pick up their items at a time that works for them rather than a time that works for the delivery driver. And then on the software side, which is where I'm based, we do it by making sure that every one of our customers can understand their customers ultimately, the paths they take through the organization, the problems they encounter, the pains that they have. And then we also empower the same organizations to then take all of that information and truly transform those customer experiences through the highly personalized communications that they deliver on all the different channels. And that's pretty much Quadient. We genuinely care about connections. So that's us.
And that's one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today, especially after reading that the FOI request from Quadient, the ICO received 131,491 complaints about nuisance calls and text messages in 2021, compared to 103,000 the year before. So that outstrips even the numbers reported pre-pandemic. But can you expand on these figures and just talk about the scale of the problem that we're dealing with here?
Yeah, it's we've been tracking these for a few years now, and they are worrying numbers. And let's face it, anything that starts with the word nuisance in a sentence and it ends in a statistic that shows an increase of about 30% year on year. It's not going to go down well with businesses, with the public, with anyone really. For me, the headline numbers, they're just the tip of the iceberg, and that's where one of the real problems comes. I read a report last week that said, I think it was every complaint, there's 26 people that stay silent but feel the same.
Wow.
Now, my maths aren't great, but I think that makes it somewhere near 3.5 million people that have been hit with calls that they say were a nuisance last year. It's a huge amount of calls. And if we assume that there's about 70 million people in the UK, which is catchment area for this specific report, that's what? I'm going to get this wrong, but 1 in 20, I think, people in the country. Yeah. That's based on us assuming that all the kids and the babies and stuff have received one as well. And if we narrow it down to the realistic adult population, it's even higher. It's an absolutely huge number. But what's worrying most for me when it comes to the scale of the problem is that there's two types of nuisance call for me. There's fraudulent ones, the strange call pretending to be from, I don't know, Microsoft, telling you that they found a virus on your machine. They really need you to log in and download a highly suspicious file to fix it straight away, or the world's going to end. But then there's also those calls that they're actually well-meaning. They're from legitimate businesses trying to help you, and they've got things so badly wrong that their own customers consider it to be a nuisance. And when you consider the number of complaints in the industries covered, I actually feel like the vast majority of them are in that second group. They're not fraudulent calls. And ultimately, when legitimate businesses are creating nuisance calls, there's a massive disconnect happening somewhere.
There really is. And it's 15 years since the iPhone first arrived. And 15 years later, we now use our phone for everything but as a phone. In fact, for the most part, when your phone rings, you think, if it is someone that's going to give me value, if it is a friend, I'll wait for them to leave a voice message before I will ring them back. So what other types of nuisance calls are you seeing there? Because there is everything, isn't there? Like you say, from robocalls to businesses, having legitimate calls. But I've become so impatient myself, even apps that have too many notifications and leave a big 2 next to the app. I get so impatient with them that I remove them. But I'm curious, are there any other big nuisance calls that you're seeing?
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at them, in my view. I guess by far the largest number of the complaints, when you look at it from a statistic perspective, they're those industries that are cutthroat, commodity-driven, generally more utility-focused. Your broadband, your phone, your TV, the other telecom services. It's about 15-ish% of the total come from those. So customers don't feel like they've got a particular relationship with a company. They don't love them for any particular reason. It's easy to switch away. So those organizations, they perceive, I guess, that need to stay front and center of people's minds. So they're bombarding them with calls, or whether it's, could be smartphone notifications, SMSs, emails, all those are available channels that you can really annoy a customer with. But for me, I guess, let's say the other way of looking at it is from a trends perspective. And I'm actually seeing a big increase in areas like banking and insurance as well. They're not the largest numbers right now, but when you look at them year over year, the traditionally relationship-led organizations, places that have a huge amount of information about their customer and could use it very valuably, they're starting to see an increasing number of nuisance calls as well. So it shows that they're doing something wrong when it sounds like they're trying to do something right.
Yeah. And I must admit, whether it be SMS messages or notifications on a smartphone app, everything from banking to pizza delivery, I'm bombarded on a regular basis. And I must admit, if I feel it's too intrusive and I'm being bombarded with irrelevant communications, I avoid those businesses. But I'm curious, from the conversations you're having, are businesses getting that message? Do they understand that they can be a nuisance and they can be too intrusive?
Oh, a good question. I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But the problem is around I think the term that you used there, irrelevant.
Yeah. How
do we define irrelevant unless we really understand the customer? Or when we switch that question around, who is it relevant to? Now, lots of the communications that we see will be very, very relevant to the business that's sending them out. They'll be bang in line with the KPIs or the revenue targets that a particular department or maybe the whole organization needs to hit. But unless you've got an understanding of what the customer needs to get out of that relationship with a business, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're relevant at all to them. A classic example right now, cost of living crisis. Right? Yeah. People are scared. Energy prices are going up. The cost of food's going up. We're seeing prices in general are through the roof. Wages aren't in line with inflation, and that's going to cause a lot of concerns for customers. So, and in my theoretical example, that they're going to call their bank, perhaps for advice, and they're going to wait on hold for 40 minutes to talk to someone when yesterday that same bank proved that they've actually got enough people to make outbound calls because they're trying to sell that same customer a new product at completely the wrong time.
Yeah.
And that second call, it meets all the bank's aims because the bank wants to save money, it wants to create more revenue, whatever it might be, but it was completely irrelevant for the customer based off their position. And those priorities they're often all mixed up right now as a result of it. I guess the best way that I always describe it, and I can't claim to have invented this, I think it might have been James Dodkins at CX Rockstar that I saw it from. But he always, to paraphrase him, said something along the lines of, businesses are thinking about the revenue or cost saving as being a goal, as being relevant. If they get it right, they should be thinking about the experience as a goal, and the revenue flows from there. If you're delivering relevant communications to you as a customer, you're not going to ignore them. You're not going to shut them down. You're going to want to see more of them because you're going to feel like you're getting value from that organization.
And as this is a tech podcast, the question I've got to ask is how can businesses better leverage technology to stop being a nuisance, to stop being that awkward person at a party, the oversharer, overtalker, etc.? How can they use technology to do that better?
Am I allowed to say just buy all our Quadient stuff? That's probably a bit simplistic. But yeah, there's so many ways. It all starts with understanding the customer, like I said, being able to visualize the paths that they take through the business and the problems that they really need to solve. The best way of doing that is through customer journey maps. That's not just me. That's a just generally accepted practice in customer experience. So every time a customer interacts with a business, they're on a problem-solving journey. So use tech to map out those journeys collaboratively, the pain points, the things that are actually working, what the emotional score is, if you like, at every single touch point. Is it working or not? And then prioritize the change that affects them. That lets you make sure that your connections that you're sending out to them are solving problems that they need solving, not just problems that help, like I say, with your own KPIs and your revenue. And then you've probably got a lot of data. So attach that into those journey maps. Make sure you're blowing away all those opinions, the assumptions you're making about, I don't know, what the customer might be doing because you want them to go down a specific route. Replace it with information on the real state of affairs. So yes, you may want 80% of customers to go down the happy path because it's cheap and it's self-service, or because they've immediately heard that pitch from the call. They want to take you up on it. Is it really happening? By replacing that opinion with scientific fact from data into your journey maps, you can define what's really happening there. And then stick the journey map that you've created on every single laptop, every single desktop, every big screen in your contact centers, near the water cooler, whatever it might be. Stuff it down the throat of every employee so they can see the results of the actions that they take on the way that the customers see their business. Employees are really intelligent in general. We often assume that they aren't, especially at the processing level. So, but if you're sharing the experience, it's one of the best ways of getting an army of customer experience advocates to really help you to change. You can't do that if it's out of date. So you need a living, breathing journey map that's got that real-time data in there so they can see the impact day to day. Even if they're far away from the front line. My previous life in banking, I worked with organizations in low-cost sites where you go out and you see someone that is just working items from a queue all day, every day. They can still impact on the customer experience if they understand the value of it. But then you have to go further. That final bit is, I've often said to customers that a journey map's just a pretty picture unless you can do something about it. Right? At the end of the day, you need to have the technology in place to transform the experience. You can't just say, yes, I know there is now a problem. Somewhere in the region, of 60-ish% of the touch points businesses have with their customers come through their communications. So it's vital that you've got to be able to be ready with a technology solution on hand that allows you to really quickly create or manage those highly personalized and meaningful messages across all the channels, not just the cheap self-service ones, even including the print ones at times. So yeah, lots of information to unpack there, but huge amount of ways that people can really use that technology to stop being a nuisance and start being really valuable and building that relationship with the customer.
And of course, whether it be a business leader or an employee, once they're out of the business and they're in their homes, they too are one of those consumers that are going to be getting that same experience. So for everybody listening, what can users do to avoid nuisance calls?
Yeah, not a lot in many cases. If they're fraudulent, obviously you should report them to the authorities, you should block them, you should make it very, very clear that there are people acting illegally. That's reasonably simple to handle. The genuine calls, though, that are either annoying or irrelevant, they're a little bit more difficult because it is somebody trying to help in their own slightly misguided way. What I'd recommend in those cases is make sure that the business know. Don't just slam the phone down on them. Tell them how you feel. Tell them how you're really not impressed with them. Point out their rivals. Ask what they plan to do to improve the relationship you've got with them now that they've sent you down completely the wrong path or now that they've upset you. You're rarely stuck as in a business relationship as a customer. It's something we often forget. There are always alternatives out there. Voting with your feet, one of the most powerful ways of getting the attention of the top brass really, really quickly. So at least give them a bit of warning, let them know that you are particularly unhappy. And it will feed up the line these days. There's around about 90% of organizations that have a chief customer experience officer or a chief customer officer, those sort of organizations. Statistics will get fed back up to them in some way.
And I'm conscious we have concentrated on the negative impacts of this, but as you said, many businesses have nothing but the best intentions and they want to provide a better service. So on the flip side of this, do you have any examples of how you've helped a business maybe create a more relevant and personalised connection that achieves that customer experience excellence that the customer expects, and maybe expand on the tech that makes that possible too?
Sure, yeah, there's lots of examples. Which one should I tell you about? Well, actually, let's take a look at it from where businesses start with us, perhaps, because they either come to us from a customer experience first perspective or a communication first perspective, and they can work both ways. So from a customer experience first perspective, we have an organization that we work with in North America, a bank in this case, that they started with complaints handling. Really unusual place for me to start, trying to improve the complaints handling process, because you would have thought that the right customer experience wouldn't have been to fix it once the customer's made a complaint. It would be to make sure they never make a complaint in the first place. But actually, when we spoke to them, they were facing a problem that a lot of our customers face, and that's that they're a customer experience department and they're really new to the organization. So they don't necessarily have the credibility that other teams in the departments and different senior people might be able to have. So what they did was they found a friendly face, and that friendly face was in the complaints handling team. They were under pressure because the complaints process wasn't going well. They let them through the door and helped them fix it. And they're now working their way back up the value chain from there, saying, "Look, we've fixed the entire communication problem around complaints. We've completely revamped the experience. Why don't we do that for all the other departments in the organization?" So they came to us and they started using our Inspired Journey product, our journey management solution that helps you really to visualize those paths that the customers take through your organization to analyze the problems and the pain points and to prioritize the changes that really will make the biggest difference. Or we've got communications first, where people come to us and say that they've got a problem with their communications and they work their way back into the experience from there. Huge international insurer that we work with, as an example of that, they started by looking at how they could reduce the cost of their communications in their contact centers. It's a classic thing of, we've got to reduce the costs. We've got to get the cost out of the business, drive people to self-serve. But they quickly realized that their communications were actually costing them more than they could ever imagine. They were creating a massive failure demand, and they were creating a really poor employee and customer experience. So they're now looking at it from a customer experience perspective. How can they understand those journeys with Inspire Journey? And then how can they transform those experiences with our Inspire Flex and our Inspire Evolve products, our industry-leading communication solutions? So you've got two different ways of working. Right? One's from a customer experience perspective, one's from a communication-first perspective. We also have organizations that come at us from both. We've got organizations like right here in the UK with one of the biggest financial institutions. They really get it. They want to work with us to do both at once. So they want to understand what the customers are doing and then do whatever it takes to transform their communication touch points to really turbocharge their business and put them back at the front. They really care about their customers. They just don't think that they can show that at the moment. So they want to put themselves back at the front where they think that they should be.
And from the outside looking in, it really seems that instead of just keep bombarding people with notifications, with calls, etc., it's about personalising and making them more relevant. And for that, I think we need to reimagine and redefine what those communications look like. And it does seem that we're on the right path. So with that in mind, what excites you about the future of the industry?
The massive opportunity to help.
Yeah.
Customer demands are always changing. You can't learn the experience, if you like, and then just fix it once. With communication solutions that are really tightly linked to the customer experience world, so much potential to really make a difference. At the same time as, like you say, completely redefining what it means to have a communication. It wasn't long ago that every communication started with an address at the top and a signature at the bottom. And it's completely different now. It's everything from those old-fashioned print communications, or maybe a PDF version of them, through to email, SMS, WhatsApp, mobile push notifications. There's completely embedded mobile and digital content into existing websites where you can start to have communications that aren't completely separate from everything else. So much potential there. And I know it seems cliche to say it, but there is nothing as good as seeing the results from a company that's listened and acted on what we've recommended, because you can see them building that really sustainable long-term advantage over the competitors, and we can just sit quietly in the background and smile because we help them with the technology that underpinned it all. And as you know, they don't really understand what the state of play really is, what the art of the possible is. We can fix that for them and allow them to change things very, very quickly. So, yeah, plenty of exciting stuff about the future coming up.
Now, we began the podcast talking about what put you on this path and the journey that you've been on. And as we've come full circle, I'm going to have a bit of fun with you now and ask you to leave everyone listening with the funniest or most interesting story that has happened to you in your career.
Well, yes, it has been a 20-something year career. Nearly didn't happen. I was once in a position where I saved about £1 million for a former employer back when I first started out, and I nearly got fired for doing it. We just redeveloped the main statement for the company. It had gone live with a big fanfare back about 20 years ago. In those days, everything was printed, so it was big news. I then may have made a minor quick code change back when I was a very, very bad programmer before people realized just how bad I was and stopped me from doing it. And I accidentally deleted the last section from the statement, which was the mnemonics. Where it says DR equals debit, CR equals credit, ATM equals the cash machine, that sort of stuff. And 6 weeks later, it got discovered by my boss. He was furious. Mainly because he coded the mnemonic section. And when your boss is furious that the junior guys deleted his code, it rarely ends well for the new person. But we calculated that the number of pages that we'd not sent out, because the page actually sort of tripped onto a new page just for that final section. It was the equivalent to about £1 million in print and paper costs over the year. There hadn't been a single customer complaint or query about it in 6 weeks. The only person who'd noticed it was the person that coded it. So we left it out. Instead of getting fired, I got my first promotion soon after. And I guess I learned my first valuable lesson in customer experience, right? Make sure that every communication and every part of every communication actually has value. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time.
What a great story. Did you ever get a chance to sit down and maybe, dare I say, have a laugh about what happened?
Years later, yes,
Yeah.
we were all friends about it. And the person that was involved at the time is now a very close friend of mine. So yeah, all's well that ends well.
I must admit, when you began telling the story, I was wondering if you'd ignored a call from someone offering you the job because you thought it was a nuisance call. But I'm glad it wasn't that.
That would have been a better story, but I don't have one of those. I'm really sorry. Yeah, I had to go with one that's genuinely true.
Well, before I let you go, for anyone listening that just wants to find more information about anything we talked about today or contact your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, plenty of ways. Head over to Quadient.com for our website. Find out all about the different problems that we solve for you. There's a handy page there to get in touch with us if you want to know even more. We'd love to chat with you wherever you are in the world. We always love to chat. We're a global company. We've got customers on every continent, even Antarctica now. So we'll be happy to help you, even if you're in the frozen wastes of the south. If you prefer the social media channels, we're on Twitter at Quadient, Quadient. We've all sorts of regional variations you can find from there as well. And of course, we're on LinkedIn. Do a little search for me, Andrew Stevens. Connect to me if you like and find Quadient that way. I'll go directly to the company page. But yeah, we've got lots and lots of different ways of you getting in touch to find out more.
Well, I'll add those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easy. It's interesting. We're talking about the effects of bombarding consumers with irrelevant communications and businesses risk causing frustration and ultimately losing out on revenue. And I knew it was a global issue, but when you just mentioned Antarctica as well, it just shows you how far-reaching that is. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to sit down and share that story with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I think the topic we've explored with Andrew today will resonate with every single person out there. We all get bombarded with SMS messages, phone calls, and intrusive notifications on our smartphone. They are a nuisance. They are annoying. But on the flip side of that, there is a business that you've used in the past that have got nothing but the best intentions and wanting to provide you with a better consumer experience. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. And I'm curious, what good examples have you seen of personalised communication and what are bad examples of irrelevant communication and intrusive communication that you've experienced in recent weeks? I'd love to try and get as many of these from you all, and I'm going to invite you to share them with me. Give me some good examples, bad examples, by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you'd like to leave an audio message of something that you've experienced and we can play on the podcast, just hit WhatsApp or any phone recording app on your smartphone, hit record, leave a little message, email that over to me. You can also get me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. I'm intrigued what you all come back with, so keep those coming in. But today, of course, was all about irrelevant communication and technology around that. Well, what we're going to talk about tomorrow? Yes, it's time for me to spin the wheel of fortune that will determine tomorrow's topic. And to find out where that stops, you will have to join me bright and early again tomorrow, where I'll be mooching in your podcast feeds. But a big thank you for listening. A big thank you to Andrew for joining me on the podcast. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.